and a very warm welcome to our video on the Science-Based Targets Initiatives, or the SBTi's public consultation on Beyond Value Chain Mitigation. This is something we sometimes refer to as BVCM. My name is Scarlett Benson, and I'm leading the SBTi's work on Beyond Value Chain Mitigation, and I am delighted to be sharing information about our work on this important topic with you today. I will start by introducing you to the concept of Beyond Value Chain Mitigation before jumping into the public consultation process and materials. So when discussing Beyond Value Chain Mitigation, or BVCM, it helps to break the term into its constituent parts. Firstly, mitigation is defined by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as a human intervention to reduce emissions or enhance greenhouse gas sinks. Secondly, a value chain refers to the full life cycle or product of a product or a process. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol defines accounting methods for companies to measure their Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 value chain emissions. Thirdly, beyond simply means further away than something or outside of a stated limit. So simply put, Beyond Value Chain Mitigation is a company intervention to reduce emissions or to enhance the greenhouse gas sinks that does not result in a change in that company's Scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions. The SBTi published the Corporate Net Zero Standard and first introduced the concept of Beyond Value Chain Mitigation in 2021. And this standard recommends that companies take action on BVCM. It provides very high-level examples of what this means, and it recommends that companies report annually on their BVCM activities and investments. And you can see on the slide here the definition of the term that was included within that standard. Beyond Value Chain Mitigation is one of the 4 key elements of the Net Zero Standard, which I'll just run you through briefly. So one is that companies setting net zero targets are required to set near-term, i.e. 5 to 10 year targets to reduce their value chain emissions in line with 1.5 degrees. The second element is that companies must set long-term science-based targets to align with global net zero scenarios by 2050 at the latest. For most companies, this means they need to reduce their value chain emissions by 90% or more. These targets, the near and long-term targets, are focused on value chain emissions reductions for all sectors except for the forest, land and agriculture sector, which can also include removals from within their value chain. For example, if they were to enhance soil carbon sequestration on agricultural land or through agroforestry. The third element, which is obviously the focus for today, is Beyond Value Chain Mitigation. And this is visualized in the chart that you can see here in the peachy color below the bars. The fourth element of the Net Zero Standard is that companies are also required to neutralize the impact of their residual emissions that are released into the atmosphere after their long-term target has been achieved. And neutralization means that these emissions are removed from the atmosphere and that they're permanently stored. At the time of recording this video in June 2023, there are 5,378 companies that have committed to decarbonize their value chains in line with science through the SBTi. And these companies represent more than 1/3 or 38 trillion of the world's market capitalization. Many of these companies are already working to align their capital flows with the Paris Agreement and are deploying climate mitigation finance towards the achievement of these science-based targets. In 2020, corporates and commercial financial institutions deployed an estimated 260 billion in climate finance, and that represents around 20% of overall climate finance within the system. However, there is a significant mitigation gap. We saw this month New York City shrouded in an orange haze as a result of climate change-induced wildfires in Canada. The world has just experienced its earliest June on record, following a month of May that was less than 0.1 degrees Celsius cooler than the warmest May on record. And we know that every single fraction of a degree matters if we are to avoid even more severe consequences of the climate crisis. In recognition of this existential crisis, the SBTi has assembled a team to provide more guidance on beyond value chain mitigation. And you can see the team's lovely faces here. And we have been working on this topic since October. We are also supported by an expert advisory group, or an EAG, which comprises 50 members from a range of disciplines. You can see the first 25 or so of these members on this slide, and then on the next slide, the rest of the group. And I just wanted to pause to say a huge thank you to these individuals for their time and input so far. It has been invaluable. So what are the objectives of our project? Well, the key overarching objective is to scale up corporate sector finance through beyond value chain mitigation to support society as a whole to reach net zero. The supporting objectives underpinning this are: 1, to provide guidance on best practice beyond value chain mitigation and to achieve broad NGO consensus on that guidance. 2, to clearly articulate the business case for BVCM and how this applies to different types of companies in different sectors. 3, to engage with other actors in the system who have influence over incentive mechanisms for BVCM, including policymakers, other standard setters, researchers, academia, etc. And then 4, agree the SBTi's role in strengthening the business case, providing new incentives in the near and long term for BVCM. So we will be publishing 2 documents in 2023. The first is the BVCM guidance for corporates, which will further clarify the definition of BVCM and articulate the need for companies to make these investments. We'll explore the business case for BVCM and provide recommendations in 3 areas. Firstly, determining the size and nature of a commitment to BVCM. 2, deploying finance and resources to different types of mitigation activities. And 3, on claims, transparency and reporting. It's really important to note, and I did mention this before, but the target audience for this guidance is companies that have set science-based targets and that have plans to achieve those targets in place. And those companies are essentially seeking to go above and beyond those science-based targets to demonstrate further climate leadership. The second document on the right-hand side has a different purpose and a different target audience. It's a research paper that will explore the barriers and incentives for beyond value chain mitigation and will provide recommendations for the climate community, including policymakers, standard setters, including but not limited to the SBTi, researchers and others, on the actions needed to enable BVCM investment by companies. Right, so the next section of this video, we're going to dive into the consultation process before closing. So we have been very busy working to prepare both of the documents that I just ran you through, and we reached an exciting milestone on Monday, the 19th of June, when we launched a 6-week consultation process on the topic of beyond value chain mitigation. The consultation materials and the online survey can be found on the SBTi website, and we've provided a link on this slide and in the video description on YouTube. This consultation process will be running for 6 weeks, as mentioned, until the 30th of July, 2023. So the consultation process is structured around 9 topics, and in the consultation document for each of these topics, we provide an overview or a discussion of the key concepts. We include a proposal or a set of options that we're considering. And then finally, for each one, we also provide a set of consultation questions, which are then translated over into the online survey where we ask that you submit your feedback. So the topics are as follows. 1, on defining beyond value chain mitigation. So we're considering what activities and investments companies can count towards their BVCM commitments. The next one is on what steps companies need to take when designing and implementing their BVCM strategies. The third is on how companies determine how much beyond value chain mitigation they will deliver each year, either in terms of how much finance they intend to deploy or how much mitigation they will deliver. Number 4 is around where companies are channeling finance. So which different mitigation activities should they provide finance and support towards in the near term? And indeed, how might this change over time? The 5th is on the claims that companies can make about their BVCM activities and investments, and how the claim that they're making might influence the activities that they finance and support. 6 is on what companies need to report in terms of their BVC activities investments, where they need to report this and how often. 7 is on the barriers needed that we really need to address and the new incentive mechanisms which could be established to encourage companies to finance and deliver BVCM. 8 is focused on terminology. So we know there's inconsistent use of terminology in the marketplace, and we want to look at how SBTi can support standardization. And then last but not least, we have provided some illustrative case studies, and what we're really considering here is how the recommendations provided above would be operationalized by companies and how it might look different in different sectors, and how we can essentially bring this to light through some case studies. So for the first topic, consultation topic on defining beyond value chain mitigations, there are a number of things to consider. Notably, we are considering whether BVCM should be limited to actions or investments with guaranteed mitigation outcomes, or whether it's sufficient that the finance has an expected outcome on mitigation. So on the one hand, there is the need to incentivize investment into research and development and innovation to develop new climate technologies. But we know that when a company makes an investment in R&D or innovation, it's not necessarily guaranteed that that will result in a mitigation outcome. By 2050, it's expected that almost 50% of the emissions reductions required to achieve net zero will come from technologies currently at demonstration or prototype stage. And these technologies need to rapidly scale. The same is true of carbon dioxide removal technologies as well. So we do need to invest in the innovation essentially here. But at the same time, we need to peak emissions by 2025 at the latest. And so one could also argue that beyond value chain mitigation should, at least in the short term, be limited to activities which deliver measurable and independently verifiable mitigation that can be unlocked today. On the second box, the one on the top right, you see we're also considering whether mitigation actions or investments have to be quantifiable, or whether there's also space for us to incentivize unquantifiable mitigation outcomes. An example would be investments in activities related to capacity building, behavior change, or policy advocacy, which can directly and indirectly deliver mitigation outcomes. But we know that for some of these, quantifying, attributing, and accounting for the mitigation impact associated with that company's action or investment can be quite challenging. Despite this, these investments are critical to ensure that there is an effective enabling environment in place in which mitigation can occur. There are also, as shown in the box at the bottom, a number of quite technical considerations that we are thinking about. And these are related to concepts that are quite well understood in the context of voluntary carbon markets. So additionality, avoidance of double claiming, leakage, permanence, and fungibility. The consultation document provides a discussion on these important questions and then poses a set of questions to inform the finalization of the guidance. Now, we note that some of these questions in this section in particular might be quite technical, and so some audiences, some responders to the survey might choose to skip this section, or even there's the option to select no comment in relation to a given question. So the second topic of consultation is around the process for beyond value chain mitigation. And our intention in the guidance is to provide a really clear step-by-step process that would guide companies in their BVCM strategy design and implementation. And the 4 steps, as you can see here, are step 1, a company sets and submits a net zero target and develops and discloses its climate transition plan. This is not going to be the main focus of the guidance, but we will refer to other documents where detail on this is provided. The reason why we have included this step, as mentioned before, is that companies must prioritize reducing emissions within their own value chains as a first step. And as mentioned before, this guidance is therefore really directed at companies that have already set science-based targets and have plans to achieve them. The second step is where a company determines how much beyond value chain mitigation it intends to deliver, or how much finance it intends to deploy towards BVCM. Step 3 is where the company establishes where it's going to channel finance, so which different types of mitigation activities it's going to support. And then step 4 is all about transparently reporting on BVCM and making credible claims. So the third consultation topic is focused on how much companies would deliver towards beyond value chain mitigation. While the SBTi at this point in time does not currently have plans to develop a standard on BVCM, which would mean that we won't be at this time assessing company commitments or performance. If we're going to establish best practice on beyond value chain mitigation, we really do need to address this point about how much a company should be delivering in terms of if they're to be considered as a leader. So in the public consultation document, we explore different approaches for how beyond value chain mitigation could be allocated to companies. We identified the polluter pays principle, which is enshrined in environmental international law, as a potential approach. This principle could be used to allocate responsibility for BVCM by requiring a company to take responsibility or to pay for the damage associated with its unabated emissions as it transitions to net zero. A challenge with the polluter pays principle when applying this to beyond value chain mitigation is that for some high emitting sectors, this would erode a significant percentage of their profit, and these companies may not therefore be willing to voluntarily adopt this approach. Clearly, in this situation, regulation is very important. Another potential approach is based on ability or capacity to pay, where responsibility for beyond value chain mitigation could be allocated, for example, based on a percentage of profit. Again, there is a challenge with this approach in that those with the least responsibility for climate change, high profit sectors with low emissions, might end up sharing more of the burden for beyond value chain mitigation. A way of visualizing this tension is shown in the graph that I will run you through here. So what you can see is the climate costs of a given company's emissions. And in this graph, we use the concept of externalities, which are the costs to society as a result of a company continuing to emit greenhouse gases, even if it's committed to transition to net zero. So we have A and B here, which could essentially be considered as a company's responsibility for climate costs. A is the cost associated with reducing the externality. So the cost that a company, or the finance that a company would have to invest to abate their value chain emissions and deliver their net zero target. B shows the social cost associated with the damage caused by the greenhouse gas emissions that continue to be released into the atmosphere while the company is transitioning to that net zero state. And these emissions are driving the warming that we see on the planet today. In today's world, we have companies deciding how much they are willing to pay towards beyond value chain mitigation or even adaptation to address this externality that is shown, that is linked to the unabated emissions that it continues to release. And so we have this internalized externality shown in C, which at the moment is essentially based on a company's willingness to pay. And as a result, you have this unaddressed externality, which is shown in D. So a key challenge that we have to avoid the worst impacts of climate change is that we need as many companies as possible to go above and beyond their science-based targets to also invest in beyond value chain mitigation. And yet The science-based or even the values-based approach of the polluter pays approach might represent a barrier to entry for some sectors. And so for this reason, in the public consultation document, we propose that our guidance outlines different methods for companies to align with either the polluter pays or an ability to pay approach. And then companies should then report transparently on the application of their chosen method so that their commitments can be compared within and between sectors. The three methods we propose for determining the nature and scale of the commitment to beyond value chain mitigation are as follows, and in no particular order of preference. So the ton for ton method is where a company would deliver beyond value chain mitigation proportional to the climate impact of some percentage of their greenhouse gas emissions. So in this example, the tons of beyond value chain mitigation delivered are determined by the tons of unabated emissions, aka ton for ton. The second method is a money for ton approach, where a company applies a carbon price to its unabated emissions to determine a financial commitment to beyond value chain mitigation. So the money directed to BVCM is determined by the tons of unabated emissions and the cost of carbon, aka money for ton. And that is shown there with me clicking. And then the third method is money for money. So where a company allocates a share of revenue or profit towards BVCM. And in this example, the financial commitment has no relation to the footprint of the company, but is instead based on a financial metric, money for money. Consultation topic 4 focuses on where companies should be channeling their investments. Now, we propose that companies think about deploying their finance and resources to a portfolio of mitigation activities. And we define a set of principles to support them in designing this balanced portfolio based on the latest climate science. It is important to note, however, that what needs financing today might look different in 5 or even 2 years. And therefore, we are proposing that there would be a temporal element to this guidance. So, I will run you through each of these 6 principles that we are consulting on. The first principle is scale. We ask companies to consider which opportunities would maximize value and deliver near-term, verifiable mitigation impact at scale, given the financial resources available. This is a critical principle, given the need to peak emissions in the next 18 months or earlier. The second principle is urgency. So we're asking companies to think about where there might be opportunities to prevent ecological or climate tipping points, or to avoid high carbon technology or infrastructure lock-in. The third principle is transformation. So if the BVCM guidance does end up supporting mitigation with an uncertain or unquantifiable mitigation outcome, of course, as I mentioned before, this is something we are consulting on. This is where we would be seeking to incentivize investment into R&D and innovation. I mentioned earlier that we only have 50% of the technologies needed to needed to reach net zero. And we need to rapidly scale these technologies, both ones that reduce emissions, but also those that remove emissions, such as direct air capture and carbon storage. So through this principle, this is really where we're seeking to drive investments that might be more uncertain in terms of their mitigation outcome, but could have cascading positive impacts and are critical if we are to deliver long-term systemic change. Principle 4 is focused on financing need. So how can companies channel finance to mitigation activities which would otherwise not receive finance, either because they have limited or no return on investment, or because they have long payback periods or higher investment risk? Similarly, where are maybe host countries seeking to attract private sector finance to support the delivery and potentially the enhancement of their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement? The fifth principle that we are consulting on is co-benefits. So how can companies support activities which deliver co-benefits such as adaptation, resilience, livelihoods, just transition, biodiversity, water security, etc. And then finally, the 6th principle is around climate justice. So how can companies support activities that contribute to climate and earth system justice, by maybe channeling finance to countries or communities with lower responsibility for climate change, but with greatest vulnerability to climate change. Now, for each of these principles, within the public consultation document, we include an illustrative set of aligned mitigation activities, and we seek to bring this to life through case studies that are included within the consultation document. We are asking consultation responders for general feedback on these principles and also to help us in framing guidance on the operationalization of these principles. Consultation topic 5 is on claims, and this is one that sits in the context of a very rapidly evolving landscape. So while we've heard from companies that claims are an important part of the business case for them to invest in beyond value chain mitigation, we also know that the claims are a source of risk for companies. In Europe in particular, we are seeing a backlash on carbon neutral claims. In the US, the Federal Trade Commission is also looking at this in the context of the Green Guide for the use of environmental marketing claims. There are a number of important developments in this space too, from a voluntary perspective with regards to claims. As you can see on the slide, Gold Standard is calling for a move away from carbon neutrality claims towards collective action contribution-led claims. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol draft land sector and removal guidance has introduced a distinction between a compensation and a contribution target. ICEAL has developed new guidance on contributional and attributional claims related to engagement in jurisdictional scale sustainability initiatives. South Pole is consulting on a new claim, which is around funding climate action. And then last but not least, the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, BVCM, has developed a claims code of practice, which is focused on carbon credits and associated claims. So given that the SBTi will not at this time be assessing beyond value chain mitigation claims, we have asked a set of pretty open questions about how we should address this important topic within the guidance. For example, how directive should we be and what information would companies like to receive from us? The sixth consultation topic is on reporting. Clearly, it's very important that companies transparently report on their BVCM activities and investments. And we've included in the document a long list of reporting questions, and we request feedback on this list. So should any of the questions be removed or edited, or does anything need to be added? And we also ask for input on where companies should report on beyond value chain mitigation. As mentioned before, we will be producing a research paper on incentives for BVCM. To inform this, in March and April, we conducted an engagement process with companies. We interviewed 25 companies and surveyed over 200. As you can see, the responses were mostly from Europe and North America, and we would really love to hear from companies based in other regions. And therefore, we have included additional questions on incentives through this public consultation process in an attempt to hear from a much more diverse set of stakeholders on this particular topic. In the consultation document, we include a set of potential actions which we believe are important in removing barriers to investment in beyond value chain mitigation. For example, barriers related to greenwash accusation and knowledge barriers. Within these, we provide examples of actions that could remove those barriers. For example, standardizing terminology and best practice norms, improving market transparency through reporting requirements, public dashboards which could potentially reduce the risk of greenwash accusation, etc. We also proposed a set of potential mechanisms that could provide new incentives for driving investment in BVCM. For example, by increasing consumer demand, investor demand, peer pressure, etc. We asked consultation respondents to rank these barriers and incentives and to suggest other possible mechanisms that we have yet to consider. Penultimately, not quite last, the public consultation topic number 8 is on terminology. So we are acutely aware of the lack of standardization of certain key terms that relate to beyond value chain mitigation. And therefore, within the consultation document, we have included a a glossary of key terms where we've proposed definitions, and we are working with the broader ecosystem to arrive at consensus on these definitions. For example, we propose definitions for compensation claims and contribution claims, and we're really keen for feedback on these terms so that we can essentially move towards standardization within the marketplace. Finally, the last public consultation topic, we have included a set of 3 fictional case studies within the public consultation document. We would build these case studies out in the final guidance. And the purpose of these is really to help companies visualize the steps that they would need to take to, show, essentially bring to life what we just described in the main consultation document. The 3 companies are in different sectors. The companies have different risks, different opportunities related to climate change, and have therefore chosen different methods for determining the size of their commitment to beyond value chain mitigation. They each align their portfolios with the 6 principles that I described earlier, but they're investing in slightly different mixes of mitigation activities. So we're asking for feedback from respondents on the case studies, and we're also asking if there are any other sectors for which we should include a case study where there might be significant demand, or maybe a sector where there's a particularly nuanced case, like the financial institution sector as an example. So moving to closing, I have one more slide. I just wanted to recap on what the next steps essentially are. The objective of the consultation is obviously to hear from as many people as possible. This is a complex topic, and so we really want to hear from a large and diverse group of stakeholders. All the information about how you should respond to the consultation is on the SBTi website and within the documents. I mentioned before that there is an online form, and that's how we will be collecting feedback. The consultation process will run for 6 weeks, so it will close at midnight on the 30th of July 2023. If you have any questions, please contact us at the SBTi at standards@sciencebasedtargets.org. And then maybe just to end on next steps. So, once we've received all of the consultation feedback, we will analyze all of the feedback and work to complete the deliverables with an expected launch date in Q4 2023. And alongside that, we will also, of course, produce a summary of the consultation process with all of the inputs, of course, anonymized and aggregated. So I thank you so much for joining us today on this video on Beyond Value Chain Mitigation. Really, as I've stated before, we would love for you to respond to the consultation, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for your time.